Thank you all for being here. I know it's late in the day, so my name is Tiffany Schwartz. I'm Senior Corporate Counsel at T-Mobile, where I support the wholesale business group. Prior to joining T-Mobile, I was in private practice for 13 years as a trademark, copyright, and technology attorney. I helped my clients build timeless brands that drive profits. In my current role, I find creative solutions for licensing the T-Mobile network to mostly IoT solution providers who bundle our service with their gadgets and we sell those. I am going to do what is normally for me about an hour presentation in 20 minutes today, so buckle up, it's going to go fast. If you have questions, I am happy to answer them. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time. If not, catch me outside, find me on social media. And with that, we're going to jump in. What is a trademark? Trademark is anything that identifies the source of goods or services. So the things that you're going to think of first off are Nike, Adidas, T-Mobile, Verizon. Shout out to our colleagues out there. But other things like sounds, that MGM line down in the lobby, that roar that you hear at the beginning of an MGM production tells you that that's an MGM production. You don't have to know that the source of that production is MGM. You just have to know that that roar means it's the same producer that you will have seen when you saw another movie that started with that line. Trademark law comes from a desire to protect consumers. It is the reason that you can expect consistent quality when you see a mark on something. So anywhere in the world that I go and get my morning latte, whole milk extra shot, I can expect, if I'm at a Starbucks, that it's going to have a consistent quality to the one that I get every morning on my way to work. That's the point of trademark law, and it's always going to be viewed through that consumer lens. So some other things that you may not think of as trademarks are colors like magenta. Don't tell my T-Mobile bosses, but I'm personally a little bit partial to Tiffany blue. Fragrance for my 80s friends. You ever made friendship bracelets with embroidery thread? That freesia smell that was on a certain brand of embroidery thread, that's a registered trademark. So you establish trademark rights in the US by using a trademark. That means you can have rights, protect rights, and enforce trademark rights without ever having to go through the registration process. Your rights are a little bit more limited. They're geographically limited to where you use the mark, and you have to actually prove the use of the mark. Registration enhances those rights. It gives you some presumptions that allow for greater damages if somebody infringes your marks, but you never have to register. It just allows for those enhanced damages. It allows you to use the circle R to put people on notice, and it means that the world is on notice even if they've not seen your registration. This is markedly different from how the rest of the world views trademarks. Most of the rest of the world are required to have a registration, and this is where you get those crazy headlines about some company paying millions to get their trademark back in a foreign country because they forgot to register in country X when they launched globally. It's also why clearance is important. When you go to launch a new brand, you want to make sure that that trademark is available in whatever country and for whatever goods and services you plan to use the trademark on. So there are a number of ways we go about clearing a trademark. Start with an internet search. You can do it yourself, you don't need a lawyer. See if anybody is using the mark that you want to use in any industry that's close to yours. Is it anything that the consumer is going to be confused by your use of the mark on your goods and services because somebody else is already using it? If so, reject it and move on. We also do US and foreign searches in different ways. We have special software that allows us to search for registrations around the world to see if anyone has registered anything similar and to see what your risk is going to be when you go to try to register it. Some things to think about when you're searching is it a term of art? If so, it might be too descriptive to be a trademark. Is it an acronym or initials? If so, you probably need to search the phrase that it stands for or the phrase that the initials stand for. If it's a name of a place that's generally known, typically say it, avoid it, and move on, but you want to search and make sure that you are not running afoul of some specialized rules about geographic indicators. Is it a person's name? There's some special considerations there, especially if it's your own name. You don't want to get into a situation where you build a very valuable brand. It's your own name, and you're forced to sell that later and never be able to use your own name commercially again. Trademark registration, I'm actually going to skip over this, but if you have any questions about registering trademarks, I'm happy to answer them. Get a lawyer early. Infringement, I kind of touched on this when we talk about claims. The legal standard for whether or not a trademark infringes someone else's rights is whether or not it causes consumer confusion. The factors that go into that are how similar are the goods and services, how similar are the marks, what are the channels of trade, where are they used, and any other commercially relevant factor. As I mentioned at the beginning, trademark rights arise out of the need and desire to protect consumers. Unlike patents and copyrights that are intended to advance the arts and sciences, trademark rights are purely commerce. So we are always looking at this through the lens of the consumer. So if the consumer is going to be confused, then there's a risk of trademark infringement that you want to avoid. You don't have to show actual confusion, you just have to show that there's that likelihood that some consumer could be confused. This is why trademark searches are important. There's also some exceptions to this that we refer to generally as fair use. So things like parody, critical commentary, your docs websites, whether it's not meant for use. So I can refer to another company's goods and services using their trademark if I am doing it in a way that is simply meant to identify that company, but I'm not using it in order to drive profits back to myself. Comparative advertising is another example, where you're comparing your goods and services to competitors. You are allowed to identify that competitor in that comparative advertising. There's certainly some special rules around comparative advertising that you want to make sure that you are in compliance with, and most of those are driven by FTC truth in advertising type laws. So what does this mean for evolving technology, especially quickly evolving technology? It means that we want to go broad. So when we're first looking at a new brand for something in an evolving technology space, in order to search that trademark, consider what trademark we want to use for that technology, we really need to have an idea of where the technology is going. And that's hard at the starting phase. And the counsel claims through this, and just as when you are starting a new company or starting a new project, you want to make sure that you're dreaming big enough. So you want to think about all the possible uses of your technology, where it could go, how it could expand, and at least search that. Make sure that you've cleared your brand broadly enough at the time. Registration gets expensive, especially if you're trying to launch locally. You need to identify the countries that are most important. I usually recommend that clients take a tiered approach to this. Identify your top 5, 10, 15 countries where you're going to launch in the next 5 years. Make sure you can register in those countries now and get those registrations secured. Figure out your second tier early on. Search your second tier. Make sure the brand is clear. And then figure out a strategy for slowly registering in that second tier over the next 5 to 10 years. Third tier comes along later, and man, if you get there, it's a great thing. Because it means the business is doing well, the brand is doing well. Trademark rights can last forever. I mentioned patents and copyrights earlier. Patents and copyrights are both time limited. So patents, you get protection for about 20 years, copyrights ever expanding, but around 70 to 100 years, depending on who the creator of the work is. Trademarks, as long as you use them, you have the rights. You need to maintain registrations. It means some extra costs. They're not terribly expensive to maintain. It means that you continue using them and you use them as broadly as you register them and all the goods and services that you registered them for. This makes them very valuable assets. It's a forever asset. It can be used as collateral for loans. Trademark rights have that value, and they will look at it and say, yes, we'll loan you money based on this. They take a security interest in it, just like they take a security interest in real property, personal property. But they have that value for you. So if you do your homework, if you do the searches up front, and if you're careful and thoughtful about building that brand, it is a long-term valuable asset. And that's not just limited to your ability to license it for money, which is also an option. So something to think about, especially in the technology phase, is we may never do X, Y, or Z technology, but is there something that we might collaborate with someone else where they use our brand, maybe they use a piece of our technology, and they develop some other technology that builds on that. We want to make sure that brand's available for that. We're not going to infringe anyone else's rights from service and maybe into that. And that's another way to monetize trademark rights throughout the lifespan of a trademark. All right, I think I'm super fast. I've got time for questions. Anything?
Okay, I've got the mic back here, so if we've got questions, just raise your hand. Right over here.
So, say you have a brand out there, you see that there's multiple brands with the same labeling or same thing. No one has registered trademark on it. When is it intact, or when do you monetize it? Is it when you register, or is it when does it grandfather when you start?
Sure. Okay, so we're going to limit to the U.S. just to make this a little bit more simple. In the United States, you get trademark rights based on when you start using it, and they are limited to your use and what someone would consider uses that would be confusing with similar. So Delta faucets and Delta airlines can coexist because nobody thinks their faucet came from the airline company. No one wants a faucet from Delta Airlines. But I would challenge you to come up with any good or service in this world that you could put a swoosh on and somebody not be confused into thinking that Nike was the source of that good or service. So if multiple people are using it and no one has registered, first, as your attorney, I'm going to say walk away. It's a mess you don't want to get into. You can come up with a better brand. If you're dying to use it, and I've had these conversations my entire career, then we start peeling back the layers and seeing who was first. And we figure out if there's a whole brand. Have they stopped using it? Are they using it for something that's different enough? Are there enough parties using similar marks that it's diluted? And are we willing to risk having very narrow rights because we love that brand? Think about some things like United. There's United Shipping, United Group, United Airlines. Everybody's kind of in the same space, right? But it's become a very weak trademark for all of them, such that they have their narrow lane. And as long as they stay in that lane, they're not infringing anyone else's rights and they all get to use it, but nobody gets to expand. And I would say not the most valuable brand long term because you can't expand, you can't go anywhere.
Over here. Hi. When do you know when to register your trademark in different countries? Is it, only the countries that you're doing business in, or is it, just does it just depend on what type of industry you're in?
It depends on the industry and where you're going to expand. Most countries of the world, your rights are only going to cover that country. There are a few exceptions to that. The Andean countries in South America have some reciprocal rights arrangements. The EU is one registration to cover all 27 countries. So that's part of what you want to think about when you go into strategy for registration. And when I talk about that tiered approach, sometimes you can get more bang for your buck by registering in some of those countries that get you rights in other countries. The other thing that I would say to think about is defensive registrations. So I don't care if you have no plans to ever go into China, you register your mark in China. Because otherwise someone else is going to, and it's going to cause a problem at some point. Shipping lines. So if you have a distributor in some country or a manufacturer in some country, even if you're not selling in that country, if your product is moving through it, I would say register there because once you have registrations, you can take advantage of customs. So for counterfeiting issues, if a product especially is coming through customs and your mark is registered, customs will stop products that don't have the right paperwork, that are suspicious, and they'll help you protect against counterfeiting issues. So defensive registrations in countries that are known for counterfeiting and all your product distribution lines, your competitors' product distribution lines. If you're using factories in countries that are less developed, register in those so that as the products try to come out of the country, most counterfeiting products come from your own factories, in all honesty. So you want to make sure that you can stop the ones that aren't genuine and get your product out. Does that answer your question? That's some of the thoughts around where to register.
When it comes to rebranding, how much work do you need to do globally in a situation like that? Like, let's say it's a total facelift of everything, just the name stayed the same.
Sure. So I'm going to go two ways with this answer. One is you do the full search. If you're keeping the same name, you've got some leeway there. If you're doing your own design, like you're changing from one logo element to another logo element, they're not related. You created the work in-house or you paid someone specifically to create that logo element, you're fairly well protected. You want to do some basic searches, but it's not going to be, a huge thing, especially if you're not changing the name. There are ways to shoehorn in rights, and you would recognize some of the brands that have done this over the years. If you look at the Aunt Jemima brand, for instance, they have slowly updated what Aunt Jemima looks like over the years. Quaker Oats has done the same. So they never really had to research their marks because they were, it's a slow evolution of a trademark. As long as it's substantially similar to what you were using previously, you can probably even get by with not having to register it again. If you do a massive change, you have to re-register. Same thing, go through that tiered approach that I talked about. Figure out the top countries. Unless you're lucky and have an unlimited budget, that you can do it all at one time. But very few clients ever compete with that aspect of the project. Yes.
Any more questions?
I was just having a conversation when we were messing with DALL-E, the image generation, like AI from OpenAI, and discussing trademarking separate features or elements of the images when they're just this automatic content creation. And I'm wondering if there's any examples or precedents recently for using AI generated content and trademarking features, elements, and who owns the image property rights to them.
Sure. You're less likely to get into trademark issues with that, more likely to get into copyright issues because it's the protection of the creative work itself versus that creative work being applied to goods and services and being used to market goods and services. So that's kind of the difference between copyright and trademark. And of course, you could take that creative work and create a trademark out of it, but the creative work itself, if it were done by a human, would be covered by copyright laws. The Supreme Court has recently ruled that AI cannot own a patent. I'm not a patent attorney, I'm going to preface it there. I only play in the sandbox with them at times. This has been an issue for 5 to 10 years now. Courts have gone back and forth on ownership of patent rights when they were created by computer learning and AI. The most recent is AI can't own it, which my understanding is leaves a gap in who owns it. Because especially from the US perspective, the ownership of a patented idea comes down to who generated the idea. And if that was done as through AI, there's no person directly behind it. We've got to go several steps. I would need a patent attorney to give you more explanation than that. As far as I know, there has not been a copyright decision on the chip. My guess is they will follow the patent decision, and whoever's behind the creation of the AI is going to be the one that owns the copyrights. The good news on the copyright side is that copyrights can vest in a company, so the company that owns the AI, you don't have to work your way back to an individual. And that's the problem on the patent side, is that traditionally it's been required that there be an individual behind it, like a person, not in the Supreme Court definition of person, but as in a human being of some sort. So I think on the copyright side, it might be a little bit cleaner in that it will be the company that owns the AI technology, owns the copyright and the creations of it. But that's just conjecture based on that recent patent decision. Does that answer your question? As best as I can.
The reference to the Supreme Court
decision on how to use that as a precedent for how that could be used in copyright.
And then once you own the copyrights, you can sell the copyrights. So then you could sell it or transfer it for free, assign it to a third party if they wanted to then use it as a trademark going forward, or if you wanted to use it, then you're free to. But it doesn't become a trademark until it's applied to goods and services and used commercially. And then you get into the trademark ownership